All right, so our next speaker uh, is Dr. Jacob Job. He describes himself as a conservationist, a scientist, a science communicator, and field recordist. I was thinking the term instead of recording scientist might be apt too. He's interested in using his tools of conservation, natural sounds, birds, to talk to people, the public, and stakeholders about biodiversity, sustainability, environmental justice, and land conservation. He has scientific training in ecology and evolutionary biology, and he has worked as a researcher with projects on sound recording and bird genoscapes at Colorado State University and in the Natural Divisional Park Service. He currently works as the communications director at the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. He's been a National Geographic explorer, and he carried out a project there to capture the voices of both birds and people along the Mississippi Flyway from the Gulf Coast to the upper reaches of Minnesota, and has produced sound stories from parks ranging from Yellowstone to Hawaii volcanoes to the Boundary Waters, and has done a great deal of work in our Uncle Special Park, Rocky Mountain National Park. And a lot of this work I mentioned is posted on his website, which I do encourage you to check out. It's just jacobarge.com. It's got a lot of fun things. You can spend a lot of time poking around listening. Because of his work in Rocky Mountain National Park, he had baseline data used in changes as a result of the East Troublesome Fire. So he had the baseline data in hand already, and he's going to tell us about that work studying the impact on biodiversity in the burn zone. He's going to talk about that tonight. So I will say welcome. Thank you very much for coming, Jacob, and I turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. You guys more comfortable with me up here or down there?
I think we need you up there so they can see you
On camera? Okay, we can do that. Sandra, can you still hear me? If so, thank you so much for being patient with me. If you all don't know, I was scheduled to speak last fall, and I had a newborn. I had a 3-month, not even a 3-month old, and life is difficult when that happens. And so I wasn't able to put it together. And one of my former colleagues was able to come speak instead. I don't know if anybody came and saw her talk about waterfowl. Her name's Casey. But I'm sure she did a great job. So anyway, thank you for being patient and waiting 1 year for me to come talk to you about this work. Also, I'm a hermit. I don't like to leave my house very often, so it's nice to know that, like, of course, Boulder exists. I've been down here maybe 3 times since I've lived in the state in the last 10 years. So it's nice to get out and see people. And I really like the in-person aspect. For all of you Zoomers, hello as well. I like saying hi to you too. But I really like the warmth of being here in person. And if anybody from Bird Conservancy is listening tonight, hello, mom, dad, hello. My wife, Laurel, hello. They probably none of them showed up, but anyway, just in case. Um, so yeah, I want to talk about what I have been doing as honestly just a passion project for the last 4 years in Rocky Mountain National Park. Um, it's all outside the scope of my work, my professional work. It's something that is sort of near and dear to me, and I'm proud of, but I don't really know what to do with it quite yet. Partly because the greatness of a study like this doesn't reveal itself until decades. It takes time for responses to wildfire to happen, and so I'm just scratching the surface of what this story has to tell us. So I'll tell you the first 3 years of that story tonight. And also, I have a very laid back talking style. So if you have a question, just Jacob, hey, question, and let's go back and forth like that. That's real easy for me. So to give you a bit of a background about myself to understand why I did this work, and Sandra, you did a great job of sort of putting that out there already, but most of the times, at least since I moved to Colorado in 2015, this is how you could find me in a national park, walking around by myself with big fuzzy objects in my hands or on my back, and these are my microphones. And I've just been in love with audio just audio in general, but audio is a storytelling tool for a long time. And so I quickly realized once I moved out here that I wanted to use it as a way to sort of leverage conservation efforts. And so I spent a very, very long amount of time moving around the Western Hemisphere, recording places. And this is not an exhaustive list. These are some of the highlights of some of the places I've been, just to capture the sounds of those places and stories of people too. I really like listening to people and helping them tell their stories. And Sandra mentioned wait, is this? Aha, Sandra mentioned my trip up the Mississippi River. Um, I spent 2.5 months living on the road and going into communities and talking with people from all walks of life about their relationship with the outdoors and recording the birds during migration and sort of telling this story of reliance on the natural world through birds and people's eyes. All this other stuff that you're seeing on the screen, all the other dots, these are all, most of it's work with the National Park Service, recording sounds. And so that's what I did. I spent a lot of time by myself in wilderness, sometimes weeks on end, collecting these sounds. And as Sandra alluded to, right down the street, right down the road is Rocky Mountain National Park in our backyard. And of course, I spent a lot of time there. And in 2016, I put together a project with the park where they basically allowed me to go record every bird that breeds in the park and get that audio recording to sort of like capture what lives there, what do they sound like, sort of knowing that that's going to change over time with climate change and all the other things that happen. And so I really wanted to capture that and bring it to people so that they could hear it and learn a little bit more about the park that they were visiting. So I spent a lot of time, it's better over here. I spent a lot of time in the western part of the park and in this corridor, the east, what is that, the Trail Ridge Road part of the park. But really, I touched all over, but that was where I spent most of my time. Ended up putting together a sound library of Rocky Mountain National Park. So if you go on their website, you can access this library. Fair warning, I was pretty new to audio recording back then. It's not as good as it could be now if I did it again, but there's some good stuff on there. So there are the bird species that are recorded. There are other natural sounds like thunderstorms and wind blowing through the pines and water moving. And then the elk rut. You can't go to Rocky and not experience the elk rut. And I have spent a lot of time living amongst elk in that park, getting some cool stuff. So that's there for people to listen to anytime, which is really something I'm proud of. Doing all this, you fall in love with a place. You spend enough time there, you get to know it, you fall in love with it. And so really this is a story about falling in love. It's a love story tonight. It's a tragedy. And then it's a story of hope and renewal. So you're going to get all of that in the different acts tonight. These are pictures of some of my favorite places in the park before the East Troublesome Fire. This is what my camp would look like. There's a moose back there if anybody has noticed right there. These are 3 on the west side. This is Big Meadows. This is Big Meadows. This is Sunrise Campsite. This is on the east side. And if I wouldn't be doing this right now, I could think of it. It's on the east side. It's out of Hallowell Park, climbing up out of Hallowell Park. And so this is what I was doing. So Michael, if you could humor us and click that first picture and let us listen to what it sounded like. I made it difficult for him. I didn't embed my sounds. Yeah. Michael, don't be afraid to give me about 10 to 20% more volume for the rest of the talk. It's a little quiet in here. That's just classic sound in Rocky Mountain, a thunderstorm, echoing through the mountains, birds calling. Can you stop that one and play the second recording? So this next one is going to be in the Kawanichi Valley along the Colorado River, June of 2016. Down the grass, tailed hummingbird. I think there's white tongue sparrow in there. From the Colorado River. Okay. So I had a real good idea of what species lived in Rocky Mountain National Park. I really knew the different locations. I just spent a lot of time there and got to know it. And outside of that work, I also spent a lot of time, with people who I love and made some good memories. And so, this is again in Big Meadow. This is me and my dad, just sitting out there along I think the town of Hoodoo Creek. My mom and I in the Green Mountain Trailhead. The elk I already mentioned about living with them. They're like buddies of mine. And then this is about 1.5 minutes before I proposed to my wife at Hollowell Park, and she didn't know what was coming. We were actually tracking elk, and 2 minutes before this picture, we were like on our hands and knees smelling the elk pee and where they'd rubbed. And I was like teaching her how to track elk, and so really setting the mood. But the point is, like, I was falling in love with this place in a lot of different ways. And all of these pictures, the ones you just saw, these here, were all impacted by the East Troublesome Fire, which happened, of course, in October of 2020. And so the fire started in Kremling, way over here. And then, kind of didn't do a whole lot compared to what it ended up doing in the first week. It burned about 16,000 acres. And then I think it was October 21st, 100-mile-per-hour winds came up and it burned 150,000 acres in one day. I'm listening to this on the radio and thinking about all these memories and all this work I had done and what was happening. I'm thinking about the town of Grand Lake where I'd spent so much time and the people living there, and watching it happen was insane. A 45,000-foot pyrocumulonimbulus, big cloud-ish, generating its own lightning. It burnt something on the order of 75 football fields per minute at its peak. And what's crazy is, as it was burning on October 21st, it jumped the Continental Divide over 13,000 feet. And a spark went 1.5 miles and landed on the east side, came back down. Estes Park got evacuated. I'm sure most of you remember that. How many of you remember this? Most of you probably do. So it created its own weather that helped it do the damage it did. And then on the other side of it, it created its own weather and slowed it down. In Moraine Park, it created a fog bank in front of it, and it produced enough humidity to sit for a day. And then what happened the next day? A big snowstorm came and basically put this and the Cameron Peak fire out for all intents and purposes. There was work to be done, but the threat was pretty much gone. So what you see in orange here is the East Troublesome Fire burn scar. It kind of looks like what are those crabs in Maryland? What are they? The red knots feed on their eggs? Horseshoe crabs. It kind of looks like a horseshoe crab scuttling across the screen there. So it was very sad. And how many of you saw the fire scar in the first couple of years? Went into Rocky and saw it up close. So a few of you. For those of you who didn't, it's a little shocking. It burned really hot. Oh, sorry. Before I get there, those 4 pictures I kept showing you, that's where they were. So they were, I got engaged there, it burned the edge near it, but it didn't burn that spot exactly. But anyway, you can imagine how I felt and how a lot of people felt. I returned the next year, the next spring, March or April, and this is what it looked like. And so you're going to get a sense. I mean, if you've been to Rocky Mountain National Park, you know what it looks like when it hasn't been burnt. And this is what it looked like afterwards. And so this is Green Mountain Trail looking back down into the Kawanichi Valley. So you're looking west right now. The trail is pretty much covered up, as you can imagine, with fallen timber. Just these crazy shots. Just not recognizable whatsoever. Yeah, so this is interesting phenomenon. So when it gets so hot and the winds are blowing so hard, it sort of melts the sap in these trees and they can't get bent over and then they harden back up and they just kind of stay like this. And so all these trees, you can imagine like straight line winds of 100 miles per hour, just incredible, pushing that fire. This is Big Meadow. This is another one of the trails, walking through it. It's just like unlike anything you've ever seen. And then again along the Green Mountain Trail. So different. I was sad, but also I knew there was a chance here. When life hands you a wildfire, drink lemonade, or something like that. So I knew there was an opportunity because of the work I had done, and I didn't want to just give up on this place because of what it went through. And so I decided right then and there, let's use sound to tell the story of this fire and help the managers of parks like Rocky Mountain National Park understand what the response is to wildfire by birds in particular. And so we started that, or I should say I started that work in spring of 2021. Instead of the big fuzzy objects that I put on my back or the microphones that I hold in my hand, I put a lot of these acoustic recorders out in the park. Let them do the work for me, leave them for months on end, and then come back and collect the data because I can't be everywhere at once. There's a lot of places I wanted to record the sounds of, but they're amazing instruments from Wildlife Acoustics. You can program them to run however you want. There are batteries, there's memory cards, they're weatherproof. You can lock them to a tree. You just set it and forget it for the most part. And there are 2 microphones that sit on the sides and they do a really good job. So I put a bunch of those out in the park, 5 of them in the burn site. So those are the red circles. And then 5 of them in these control sites outside the burn scar at similar elevations, similar habitat types. Pretty much the only difference that I was aiming for was the fact that a fire happened at 5 of these sites compared to the others. This is the Continental Divide again. Between the fire scar. This is on the east side. Mill Creek, the Mill Creek Basin is what I was looking for. Moraine Park is right here. And then Bear Lake Road is over here. So I set those out April of 2021. Here's what they look like in the field. So on the left, so I put these sort of tamper-proof protective boxes on them to keep animals. So animals they're curious. They love messing with things. And so you put these on them and it keeps them from messing with it, keeps people from trying to get inside of them. But you can see those fuzzy little microphones sticking out on the side. So this is a control site in the Mill Creek Basin. This is a burn site in the Mill Creek Basin. It looks okay, but all these trees are dead. There's a little bit of green here, but it's still early in the season, as you can tell by the snow. We put those up. So I've had a lot of help putting them up with friends and my wife. These 2 are done on one day. The 8 on the other side we do in one day, 17-mile day. We usually start about 7 a.m. and you're done by about 5 a.m. or 5 p.m. and you're just exhausted because you've got about 4,500 feet in elevation throughout the day that you're covering. So it's a lot of work, but worth it. There's a delay, so we'll go over here. But I like this one. There it is. So these are the 5 sites. Ignore my hand. I'm just taking pictures, marking cardinal directions. these are the 5 different sites in the burn site. This is that Mill Creek site again. You get a better look at the burn damage here. This is in the Kawanichi Valley, Big Meadow. At one side of Big Meadow, this is at the other side, and this is a tiny meadow on the way to Big Meadow along the Green Mountain Trailhead. So you can just see what they look like compared to the controls. Oops, wrong way. Compared to the control sites, which are very much not that. They're all paired up with each other, elevations, habitat type, whatever. One of the things you'll notice though, and this was kind of done by accident, they're all kind of areas that have water of some sorts, either wet ground, creeks, standing water. I really focused on places where I had recordings before, and I recorded there because there's a lot of life around water. So keep that in mind. I'll address that near the end of this talk. What time am I done tonight, by the way? Okay, so I'm still okay to take another 20 minutes. Okay, just making sure. Okay, yep. So the 2021 field season, these are the dates that I set the recorders to start recording. Come back over here. You could see some of the dates are highlighted in pink. So here's the problem with not doing the recordings yourself. Sometimes technology fails for a number of reasons, and you don't know until you go and change the batteries at the end of July. So the Mill Creek site, you can see, only ran for 2 days, unfortunately. It was the control site. The burn site also, for some reason, stopped short of the July date, but I got quite a bit of data there. And you can see also after I changed the batteries, again, it failed after about 3 weeks. But everything else ran as scheduled from, it looks like I started them early May and they ran through end of July, change batteries, start up again, and then I go take them out of the field at the end of October before the snow settle in. And then again in 2023, you can see I tried to do a similar pattern. I got out a little bit early. I was excited. Oh, by the way, I take a year off in between because again, this is just me doing this. And so I get really tired and life happens. And so I didn't do a field season this year. I will put them back out again spring of 2025 and do this work again. So I'm going to keep alternating years as long as they'll let me and as long as I live out here. Early April, again, through the end of July through the end of October. And then I take them in. And again, a few issues, stopping early. What you're going to realize though is I'm really only concerned with, for the purposes of this talk, with the audio at the first part of the season. And really it's just from middle of May through the end of June when birds are singing the most. That's when I care about them. So like I got most of the good data. There was plenty of good data, except for this site right here was a complete loss, unfortunately, in the first field season. In total, I have recorded almost 7,200 hours or 298 days of audio. It's a lot. That's an 85% performance rate. That's really good. That's better than I could ever do by myself. If this would have recorded perfectly, we would have been looking at 350 days of audio and about 8,500 hours of audio. So not perfect, but a lot and really, really good information in there. So remember, I told you, this is a 2-part sort of project. One of it's just to collect cool sounds and tell stories with these sounds. It's my favorite part. The other part is the scientific part. What are the birds doing? How are they responding? It's also fun, but I like the sounds. So first, let's just listen to some cool sounds. I hope that's okay with you because let's just go there. So Michael, would you pull up the picture on the left? We're going to first just listen to some sounds. And I told Michael ahead of time, it's up to his prerogative what he wants to listen to. So we'll listen to, I don't know, 20 seconds of maybe 5 recordings. And then we'll do the same for the control site. So Michael, go ahead and surprise us with something. Michael is here. No, he's in the back room. Here I go. Excited flycatchers knocking the bills at each other. right, Michael, what else you got? Might be snowfall. Michael, as you're playing, you'll see a sort of a buffer, like all when there's more activity. Feel free to pass forth to those. All right, next one. And the Dark-eyed Junco. Type on the ground, falling. Another one flying. Okay, absolutely. Wilson's Warbler with an American Robin in the background. Michael, are there some that are non-birdie, some fun other ones? Let's just wow them with something fun. I know what this is. Oh. Moose. Rutting moose. Antlers. All right, Michael, let's give the people what they want. Let's do some elf red. This is an elk stampede. I think. Getting closer. This camp is going to get loud. He's gonna bugle. I know he is. I wouldn't just put this on here, I don't think. Michael, can you fast forward to the big bugle? Huh. Is there another one? I'm kind of disappointed. I think he's like, this is at night. You can hear the echoes. It's real calm, the atmosphere. Listen to the echoes. Anyway, so click on the other one, the control site, and let's do some of those recordings too. Michael, you're doing great. You're the star of the show so far. So this playlist is on my website, these playlists. It's beautiful. And there's like 50 recordings per playlist you can listen to. Is this the control site now? The other picture? Sorry, click on the other picture. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, I was having a little bit of trouble.
Oh, you can talk back? This is great.
Yeah, I can talk back. Sorry. I'm on the other one now. Just
All
pick
right.
something.
Might take a second. You can just pick anything you want again. Anybody? Mountain chickadee. It blows my mind they live up there year round. As you're scrolling through, Michael, see if you can find anything that's like a morning chorus, dawn chorus, something like that too. You don't have to find it right now, but if you see it, click on that eventually. I don't know that it exists. You may be looking for something that doesn't exist. Spotted sandpiper. Probably along the Colorado River. And then let's do one more, Michael. And then while you're doing that one, while it's playing, look for coyote echoes. Western forest. If you found the coyote or any coyote one, play it. The echo. Thanks, Michael. You can pause them now. It's like Christmas getting these recorders back and like going through it. It takes a lot of time to go through it, but it's really fun. And there's a lot. You guys should really spend some time if you're interested in listening to it. Just put on some headphones, treat yourself, just glass of wine or whatever you like and have at it. So that's what it sounded like. The question is there any difference between the different sites? And so that was really the hard task ahead. And so essentially what I did is from mid-May to late June each year, generally 1 week apart, I selected 5 dates that I would do you guys know what point counts are? So you go out in space and you stand there and you count all the birds you can see or hear at like a 50-meter radius all around you. It's been a standard scientific protocol for as long as birds have been studied. So I wasn't there. So the recorders kind of acted like me with some limitations. Obviously, they don't know how to tease apart what's the same bird singing over and over versus a different bird very well. And so what I did was work in that framework. I selected 5 dates each year. Within each date, I did 21-minute point counts. So I listened to 1 minute of audio that was randomly selected from 30 minutes after dawn till 10 a.m. I put those recordings up on a spectrogram. So this is a visual representation of that 1 minute recording. So these are the bird calls right here. So it can help you identify birds if you struggle with the sound. And I would just listen to those 21-minute point counts per date times 10 sites. And then I'd do it again and again and again and again until I had all 5 dates covered for 1 year, and then I do it for the next year. So in 2021, because remember, I lost some data at that first site, I performed 860 minutes of point counts. In 2023, I performed 940 minutes of point counts. And all I was doing as I was listening on the computer, I had a list of species, ones and zeros. If I heard that species one time in that 1 minute, because remember, it could be the same bird singing more than once, and I wasn't always sure, so I only marked presence or absence. 1 is present, 0 not there. And so I just did that over and over and over and over and over and over. Until eventually started to pull out some data. So in 2021, we're just going to get into the meat of it. Across both burn sites and control sites, there were 48 species that were detected by these recorders. It's pretty neat. What's even cooler is 40 species were detected at each site type. So in those burn zones, you saw those pictures. I detected 40 species of birds, 40 species at the control sites. Now, they weren't all the same, so community diversity differed. So which species were there differed. And so at the burn sites in 2021, these are species that I only detected at the burn sites. So dusky flycatcher, mallard, mountain bluebird, ringneck duck, sora, spotted sandpiper, white-crowned sparrow, only at the burn sites. For the control sites, Clark's nutcracker, Hammond's flycatcher, house wren, lesser goldfinch, Swainson's thrush, warbling vireo. Only detected those at the control sites in 2021. What was even cooler, in any given 1 minute point count, I would detect about 4 3/4 species at a burn site. At a control site, not quite 3 species in a 1 minute point count. So greater diversity in the burn sites at any given point count. Would you have expected that? I wouldn't have either. I'm going to just tell you right now. I walked into those burn sites and I was like, this is going to be bad. And no value judgments here, and I'll get to that at the end, but these are just the raw data. If you look at 2023's data, 48 species again detected. And by the way, in total, between the 2 years, 52 species detected. So there were some in 2023 that were detected that weren't detected in 2021. At the burn sites in 2023, 42 species were detected. At the control sites, 37 species were detected. And again, look at this pattern. So at any given point count, I would detect about 4.5 species at a burn site. At a control site, again, less than 3 species. So more diversity at those burn sites. And these are the species that were unique to burn sites in 2023. American three-toed woodpecker, brown-headed cowbird, chipping sparrow, green-tailed towhee, Hammond's flycatcher, mountain bluebird, orange-crowned warbler, olive-sided flycatcher, red-winged blackbird, sora, white-crowned sparrow. And then control sites, Canada jay, Clark's nutcracker, dusky flycatcher, red crossbill, Swainson's thrush. So again, some community diversity differences. But in general, I'm hearing more birds at burn sites than I am at the control sites, which is very interesting. Insectivores. Gotta love them. So let's just get into maybe a little bit of why. I know I'm kind of jumping the gun, but like I think you might be thinking what I've already alluded to. The fact that these were in these wet areas, I think they kind of acted as buffers from the severity of the fire. So what you can see here is where there was standing water or wet ground, it's rebounding very quickly versus as soon as you get away from that water table, nothing's really growing. Nothing's growing. You can see, I don't know what the date, this is July, this is June, June, July, somewhere in there. Oh, by the way, I put out camera traps under each recorder. So there are cameras also on the trees. I'm not even going to talk about that tonight because I was interested in what the mammals are doing too. Haven't got there yet. Still working on the birds. But so there was vegetation growing quite quickly. And this was 2021. 2023, a lot of like wildflowers. And so in trees like aspens this tall, young conifers this tall. So like the seed bank, at least in these lower areas, was pretty well intact. Up here on the sides, there is growth going on, but it's much less. So this is for any of you science people out there who are into statistics, anybody at home, anybody here, this is for you. Basically, what I did was tried to predict, tried to say, okay, what is affecting these detections of birds? So I looked at, keep doing that. Okay, was there any difference between years? Was there any impact on the date, time of year? So like, did early dates, were there more birds early on or were there more birds later on? Were there some species that were seen or heard more often than other species? Did fire have an impact? So all of these things, I just threw them into a model and I said, tell me what's going on, essentially. And for those of you who care, this binomial family framework, that basically just means my data was ones and zeros. Yeses, they were there. No, they were not there. And then, so that's how you handle ones and zeros in your data, that type of statistical framework. In 2021, we found, actually in both years, if you looked at them separately, it's really nice to see that the same things turned out to be significant. So like the time of year was significant. We detected more birds later as we went into June versus early May, which kind of makes sense if you think about being at elevation. It takes some time to warm up and all the birds coming back from migration. Point counts earlier in the morning had more birds than later in the morning. Again, something you guys are probably familiar with. It's best to go birding in the morning when birds are more active. Some species were more common than others. We'll see that. Most importantly, I'm not really going to talk about this, but this is really why we're here tonight, is this fire by species interaction. Basically, some species were impacted by fire more than others. We're going to see which ones and how so. And then if we combined all the data, and basically what this is doing the same thing, but I was really interested in this last little model input here, which is basically fire may have had an impact on, let's say, American robins in 2021, but did it have the same impact in 2023? Or were they starting to change, have a different response to fire? And think about this. If this study goes for 50 years, let's say, for whatever reason I'm doing this 50 years from now, we would imagine things are going to change over time as the ecosystem starts to rebound. And so I want to see how the species composition changes, how their presence changes over time as well. And so that's essentially what that's getting at. How are things changing over time with respect to species and fire? So 2021, and for those of you who, raise your hand if you can't read that. I apologize. Yeah, oops, let me go back. So I'll read them off to you. So these are the 4-letter bird species code. So like American crow, American robin, three-toed woodpecker. So I'll highlight a few of them, make it a little bit easier. So the ones that are circled in this turquoise color, these are species that were significantly more prominent at control sites. Cordilleran flycatcher, dark-eyed junco, hermit thrush, mountain chickadee, ruby-crowned kinglet, violet green swallow, which don't tell anybody. Violet green swallow is a catch-all for swallow in general because I can't tell tree swallows from violet green swallows. I can't without seeing them. By ear, I can't do it, and I'm really embarrassed by it. So those species were significantly more common in control sites that were not burned. Okay, and like for instance, like mountain chickadees, basically undetected at burn sites. And then about 10% of point counts had mountain chickadees detected in control sites. What's another good one? Ruby-crowned kinglet. So about 20% of point counts at fire sites had ruby-crowned kinglets. But if you went to a control site and listened, you were about 50% likely to hear ruby-crowned kinglet. Okay? And everything else that's not circled, these species were more prominent at the burned sites. And so these two that are like really high up and really common. So American robin, not so common, but 19% of point counts at control sites had American robins. If you come up here, about 80% of point counts in burn sites had American robins. They loved being in the burn site. This other one's Lincoln sparrow. 30% of the time they were at control sites, about 80%, is that 80%? 80% of the time at burn sites. And so we have all of these species. And these species that I've put up here, Again, it's hard to read. I apologize. I've left out the species that there was no significant difference. They were similar detections between burn and control sites. I've just chose to highlight the ones that we saw a difference. Question? Yeah, it's a lot. 2023. There it is. Oh no, it did this before, but it takes just a second. We'll start over here. Tell me when it's good. It's good. We'll come back over here. I'll do the same thing. I will put up the species that were more frequently heard at control sites. So this, you can see there are a lot more turquoise circles this time. And those species, American crow, courtier and flycatcher again, common raven, hermit thrush again, mallard, mountain chickadee again, ruby-crowned kinglet again, red-breasted nuthatch, Savannah sparrow, yellow-rumped warbler. These are the species I was detecting more often at the control sites. Everything else detected more often at burn sites. And look at this guy standing alone. I mean, Lincoln sparrows are just, is that the Lincoln sparrow? Yeah, Lincoln sparrows are just, you hear them all the time. If you've been to Rocky, it's hard to miss them, especially in wet areas. American robins still showing up very frequently, but kind of shrunk that gap a little bit. We'll see that in just a second. Any other species you guys care about? Maybe they're up here. I can tell you. Which one? American three-toed woodpecker. It's not up here. It's surprising, right? Because you'd think they'd be where? In the burn site. Absolutely. I think I show them on the next slide, though. Olive-sided flycatcher, also not up here. And you would expect to hear them probably in the burn site more often. But this is a long game. This story is going to play out over time. And so, which one? Okay, so red-naped sapsucker right here. More common. So first of all, not very commonly detected. And I can tell the drums apart. So I included drumming in this as well for the different species. Virtually not detected where there was no fire, and detected about that looks like about a 3 to 4% rate where there was fire. What else? Anybody? Okay, so I put up some interesting, notable species up here. So we have ruby-crowned kinglet, mountain chickadee, yellow-rumped warbler, American robin, Lincoln sparrow, olive-sided flycatcher. I don't know why. Let's just take a trip back down memory lane. Olive-sided flycatcher was significant in 2021, that first year. There it is. They were detected at about 20% of point counts in burn sites and virtually undetected at control sites. So, okay, coming back to these species. I've put these up here because they had some of the strongest responses to, I think I broke it, to fire. Tell me when it's back. Here's the response. So in fire, you were 10% less likely to hear a ruby-crowned kinglet, 4% less likely to hear a mountain chickadee, 3% less likely to hear a yellow-rumped warbler. Versus robins, you're 20% more likely, 17% more likely to hear Lincoln sparrow, and 6% more likely to hear, and this is across both years, to hear olive-sided flycatchers. So we already see these species in packs. Some of these make sense. What do you know about chickadees and kinglets? Where do they make a living? In the crowns of trees, right? The conifers. What was not left over after the fire? Any crowns of trees. And so if I think about the migratory birds that came back to the fire, they're pretty tied to their home range. They come back and it's not there. There's probably a lot of confusion going on and a reshuffling, so to speak. And so just interesting to see this. So there's some biology here that can explain this, and I won't go into that, but I'm sure we can have a whole nother talk about that another time. With both years, so again, are these patterns starting to change over time? And so I put significant differences up here. So the American robin, remember that gap had shrunk by 2023, and you can see it. They're starting to become less common by 2023. Will that pattern continue, or was that a one-off year? We'll find out. I expect some of these patterns to continue and you'll see them switch, or just those differences go away completely as the ecosystem recovers. Lincoln sparrows are becoming more common, probably maybe because of the vegetation growing back. I don't know. I'm not here talking about that, but it's just interesting to speculate. Where's another one that's sort of flip-flopped? So common ravens were more common in the fire early on, but not so much the second year. Is that statistical noise? Is it real? It suggests it's real, but they were detected in such low numbers to begin with. So starting to see some of these patterns, but it's so early. I want to come see you all in 20 years and we'll talk about this again and see what's really going on. So what does it mean? So we do know fire has impacted the bird community. I've showed you a bunch of species that are responding to fire differently, okay? And that's across both years. Like I mentioned before, I think the wet areas might be buffering the effects of wildfire a little bit. So if I were to place these recorders far away from any wet areas up on a mountainside, basically I'm asking, would we see the same results? Would we hear the same species? I don't know, probably not. I wish I could go back in time and do that. I could start now, but it's a lot of work. But we have what we have. Starting to see some change, but this is going to be ongoing. This is a long-term study, and I really hope I can continue it. And I really hope it tells us a really cool story that can help land managers and park managers help protect the forest, help them recover, and understand what to expect after events like these. This I haven't totally fleshed out in my mind, but you heard those echoes. Am I picking up species that aren't even using these wet areas that are up in the mountains, up in the forest, and they're sort of pseudo detections? Because remember, I said in point counts, when you're in person, you want to limit how far out you're listening. It's a challenge, but you can do it reasonably well. It's very hard remotely through a pair of headphones, even though they're recording in stereo. So I do get spatial separation of sounds. I could be picking up some sounds that are bleeding into things, but these sites are all at least a half a mile from each other. So birds from one site certainly aren't being heard at another site. So we've got that going for us. And this is a big point right here. This is just an observational study. I'm not trying to say like this is going to impact mountain chickadees down the road. This is what it's having an impact on their breeding or anything like that. We are just showing the patterns, or I am just showing these patterns for what they are and not drawing any conclusions from them about impacts on species necessarily, or why it's happening, or the mechanism of why these things are happening. So I just want to be clear about that. Lots of speculation. Cool, great. Let's change gears then, just a little bit near the end here. So I work for Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. I've got my shirt on. I've been there since March. I'm the communications director, so I'm in charge of taking all the great work we do and bringing it to the public in all the different ways that information gets communicated. Social media, flyers, press releases, our website, events, like all the things. I help out with that. And so I would be doing a disservice to our organization if I didn't just introduce you to us. How many of you have never heard of Bird Conservancy of the Rockies? One person. It's surprising though. Usually it's more than half the people are like, and we're like right there, here. So this is for you. I'm just going to focus on you. Yeah, awkward. So who we are, and those of you who do know us, maybe this is a little bit more of a thorough introduction. Our mission, as you can see, is to conserve birds and their habitats through an integrated approach of science, education, and stewardship. And so we have these three pillars, and really as a fourth pillar, we like to include partnerships in there. We don't do our work without the great partnerships that we have. And so we're really unique in the sense that we really lean heavily on all these equally. So we are working with our science team. We are working with educators to raise the next generation of young scientists, of bird lovers, to take that message out to the general public. We are working with landowners to find conservation solutions that work both for birds and economies, local economies, and for people. And that's really important to us. And we work all across the Western Hemisphere, but really from the Rockies to the Great Plains, Mexico, 16 states, I think we're in now, 3 countries we do our work. So a big range where we do all of that work. We have an event that's coming up pretty soon. It's our biggest event of the year at Denver Museum of Nature and Science. It's Friday, October 18th. If you scan that code right there, it'll take you to the registration screen. It'll tell you more information about what it is. Essentially, it's our fall fundraiser. It's also a way for the community to get to know us because we talk a lot about the work that we do. And really, it's a great chance to introduce ourselves. It's our fall fundraiser. It's called A Night for the Birds. And it really is just bringing a community together to putting their support behind bird conservation. And it's a really, really special event. So I'm told. I'm only 6 months in, but I've seen. And I'm planning a lot of it. So I better believe in it. If you want to know more about us, know more what you can do for bird conservation, you want to get involved, if you scan this, you can sign up for our newsletter, our e-newsletter. It'll come to your email address. It's got all kinds of great stories about the work we're doing, events that are coming up, ways you can volunteer. We have bald eagle nest watches. We have bird banding stations, northern saw-whet owl ban. I mean, there's a lot of things that you can get involved in and volunteer with, or just keep on up to date through this newsletter. And that will lead you to a whole other list of things that you can do with us. So it's a good resource if you're interested in knowing more about us. And then finally, I just want to sincerely thank, you all for bringing me here. This is the first time I've talked about this work in an official capacity. So thank you for being the guinea pigs. Denver Audubon funded a good chunk of the research in the first year, allowing me to buy a lot of those recorders. One of their members allows me to stay in his house in Tabernash every time I have to go and change the batteries and the memory cards and put those things up. So thank you to them. National Park Service obviously is letting me do the work in Rocky Mountain National Park, and they've been a great partner. And then at Colorado State University, this is who I worked with when I started this project, and so I'm grateful for them for letting me explore this work. And then my field techs, aka my friends and family, who I've conned into doing this for a 6-pack of beer and a night at Tabernash. My good friend Jake, John Eric, my brother-in-law, Kyle, a conservation resource officer, a CO. The first time I went up there, I didn't know I had to have someone with me, and I didn't know they weren't going to let me in because this is before the trails were open. They were like, absolutely, you're not going in by yourself. And I was like, this is my whole field season. I'm here. And so he volunteered to go out with me, and we ran those, almost jogged, let's say jogged, fast walked those 17 miles at times, and got it all done by 1 p.m. because he had to go on shift at 1 p.m. So he was a trooper, literally. And then my wonderful wife, who did it once and might not ever do it again. There was a thunderstorm in the middle of one of these burned out fields and lightning, and she just huddled next to a tree and wouldn't move, no matter how much I told her that's the worst thing you could do. And you could see we had to wear helmets early on because of the threat of falling timber. Although I think if a tree would have hit me, I don't know how much that would have helped. So, and that's my website. If you want to write to me, ask me any more questions, my website, I was thinking about taking it down, but now I'm going to leave it up because apparently people are going and it's a good resource. So I'm going to leave it up for a couple more years. Thank you. Did I go over? Be honest with me. No, okay.
So questions from the audience. Carol.
Mostly, do you work with Mr.
Not at all. It's a short question. What, how come? You're just curious.
A lot of your goals seem to coincide with theirs.
The fire study or bird conservancy?
That's what I mean, the conservancy.
Oh, the bird conservancy.
Yeah, the bird conservancy.
Yeah, so this is completely a passion project. They don't fund any of it. I don't use my time for it. I just started working for them in 2024, which is even years I don't do field work. Odd years I do. So usually I just go up on a Friday and come back on a Sunday and do it. So yeah, I suspect there will be a chance to maybe incorporate some of the findings into their work at some point, but none yet.
Carol, do you have a question from the Zoom?
Anne, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Is that my mom?
No, Ann Cooper.
Oh,
I don't see her unmuting, so I will put it in the chat. If your work is ongoing, how do you take into account the general trends of decline in bird populations
yeah.
or the potential for more fires?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, if another fire, let's start with the somewhat easier question. If another fire were to happen on top of this one, first of all, so the fuel source that led to this fire, up to 85% of these trees were already dead or dying because of the beetle kill. So there's an incredible fuel source. That season or that summer from July until when the Troublesome Fire started was the driest on record in 100 and some years in that area for that period of that like few months of time. So it was a pretty unique confluence of events that happened, but events that we're seeing happen more and more often. And so I don't know, like if fire happens again, we'll make another glass of lemonade and figure it out. I don't know what we'll do. As far as general bird declines, I think, that's true no matter what study you're doing. I mean, birds are declining across the world. 3 billion birds lost in the last 50 years. A study came out this week that showed windows are killing far more birds than we thought every year, over 1 billion. So I think that's kind of baked in. Guys, I'm not doing research science anymore. I've kind of left that field, so there's probably a better answer than what I'm giving you. People who are smarter than me probably could answer that. I haven't really taken that into account, and I haven't taken this to peer-reviewed publication yet. So, yeah, I don't know. That's a very unsatisfying answer, but I don't want to lie to you.
Okay, thank you.
Please wait for the microphone.
Oh, yeah, so people at home can hear.
Speak it.
Have you tried to put the data in that you got before the fire?
Yeah, so that was the initial intent. And I can, but the sites where I have the microphones, sometimes they're where I had the historical recordings. Sometimes they're not. And when I do have the historical recordings, sometimes they're only a half an hour long. And so what I've done is I've gone back and listened to them and like recorded the species. So I know what species were there, and it's similar. It's remarkably similar in most cases. Now, can I do the full like acoustic point count, put it into the model type thing? I can't. I don't have enough data. I think leaning into using those old recordings was part of my storytelling parts of this work that I haven't really leaned into yet. I imagined telling a story on Colorado Public Radio, for instance, or through some venue that I want to wait until I have a clearer story. Yeah. We have a couple up front.
Sandra, question.
Oh.
Any questions from Zoom?
I don't see any right now. Zoomers, just let me know in the chat or unmute and speak up.
Carol?
Well, I'm sitting here thinking to myself, what are these birds eating? And it just got me thinking about what are they eating, or what do you suspect they're eating? And about the three-toed woodpecker, don't you think maybe they'll come this year because maybe it takes that long for
3 to 4 years.
to come to the trees?
Yeah, it could be, and that's the beauty of doing this over time, is seeing how these species respond to fire differently, I'm sure, and they have different patterns, and we'll see. I'm excited for 2025 and see what it brings. What they're eating, this is kind of what I was getting at. Like, I'm not drawing any conclusions about what does this mean for the birds, because they could find habitat there, one of the questions that came to my mind was they're using it, but are they successful breeding, for instance? Are they producing as many offspring as if they weren't in a burn zone? And I'm just not looking at that question. I'm not able to answer it. But um, anecdotally, there are insects in the wet areas. If you go up into the hills, there's not much. But I'm not doing it in like gathering data on that in a scientific way, though. It's just anecdotal. So I don't know. I don't know what they're eating, but there are a lot of birds there. Maybe, remember, I was detecting many more birds in the burned areas and the control sites. Maybe that starts to come down a little bit and teasing apart, okay, is that the ecosystem recovering and coming towards a control state, or is that just they're not having success here and they're just leaving? That'll be a challenge to tease out.
Sandra, any questions from Zoom?
That thing you just mentioned, which is how could you measure, or what kind of collaborator would you need to engage to be able to say the ecosystem is recovering that supports the birds, right? So you have the data on the bird diversity, but are there other ways to characterize recovery?
Sure. I mean, yeah, invertebrate presence, vegetation, both woody and herbaceous, mammals, like all of these things that I'm sure the park is already measuring, can feed into the work that I'm doing, or I can feed into the work that they're doing. And so if there are people out there, measuring invertebrate density, measuring flies, beetles, ants, whatever it is, like that's something that can help sort of anecdotally maybe get at the patterns that I'm seeing, or people who are doing work with birds in those areas directly, taking logs, like writing down what they're eating, collecting their feces and doing DNA samples and like understanding what is there to support them, people going in and measuring the plant species, the trees that are coming back, how tall they are, like all of those things that go into an ecosystem. I'm sure the park is measuring. And in fact, I had a colleague introduce me to a couple people who are using acoustic recorders in the Cameron Peak and East Troublesome Fire scar that I didn't know about to look at birds. So we have a meeting on October 2nd or 11th to get to know each other and understand how maybe we can help complement each other's work, because it sounds like they're doing a slightly different approach. So there are a lot of people doing this work in within the park, outside the park, and I think in my best case scenario, because I'm really, really not that interested in writing scientific publications anymore, is I find a group where I can allow them to have my data and support them and still be a part of that study, because I know by myself I'm not very likely to publish this. All the scientists around at home are cringing right now. Sorry, guys.
It's okay. You're good. Very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
So you touched on several points that are kind of adjacent to my question, but I was going to say you have this auditory recording data, and we heard other taxa. You're focused on birds, but there are invertebrates that we heard, there are amphibians we heard. I don't expect you necessarily to do it, but do you think that this data set, if you're willing to open it up to others, would be something that someone interested in those other taxa, bats perhaps, could get data from this data set to have a more complete picture?
It's certainly possible. Bats, no, because I limit the sampling rate. So bats are calling way high up in the frequencies. My recorders aren't picking that up. But insects, it's possible. Certainly mammals. The camera traps, so I ignored that. I have 20,000 pictures of mammals in the park that you could do occupancy analyses. Anecdotally, and I'm almost fairly certain it's true, the first year there were a lot of mammals, especially elk and moose. This 2023, there was hardly anything. The numbers were down. I don't know. I don't have the quantitative numbers behind us to say exactly, but it felt much emptier. I had several bears in 2021. I didn't have any in 2023. Still no mountain lion, coyotes. So yeah, I mean, one of the things I was hopeful to have ready for you all, and I just couldn't get it in time. So you can take a long recording and you can sum it up into what's called an acoustic complexity index. Basically, if you had just white noise, you guys know what white noise is. Shh. its acoustic complexity is 0. There's nothing unique within it. It's just a solid, same sort of sound over and over. As you start to introduce other sounds into a blank slate, essentially, it starts to get more complex. So if you put frogs and insects and birds, that number goes up and up and up. And I have graphs over time of these sites to show, like, well, they peak around late June. Why? Well, that's when birds are singing the most, and they drop in the summer, and they so, like, there are other ways to get at, like, what else is out there. Um, and I'm all for sharing my data because it's there, and why not? So yeah.
Sandra, any last questions from Zoom?
I don't see any. Have some compliments in the chat. Thanks for the.
What was tonight's attendance?
We had 20 on Zoom.
Was my wife there?
I don't know. I'm not going to rat her out if she was or wasn't.
I'll find out.
I've
Well,
got a, oh, go ahead.
I was just saying we will post it to our YouTube channel eventually after a bit of editing.
Okay.
I got a couple of questions about wildlife acoustics equipment
Mhm.
because we are, I work for the city of Longmont and Natural Resources,
Sure.
and we got the boss's permission to buy a bunch of the equipment to do some remote surveys. So let's just say some general questions. What's your biggest hint about deploying acoustical equipment?
Yeah. So the work that I do is the audio work is I get good recordings not because I'm a great audio recordist. I get good recordings because I know the land. I'm an ecologist, I'm a biologist. I know how to, like, interpret what's on the landscape. And so I would lean heavily on your ecologists and biologists to know where to place these things. Hide them from people, lock them up, put them above elk height. I would, I would check them as frequently as you can because, as I showed tonight, things can happen. Keep the firmware updated at all times. All that was firmware issue for the most part. But they're a wonderful tool. And if you are looking at bats, they have a specific recorder for bats, and it can record everything else as well. Bigger files, more expensive, but they can do the job quite well. And I'm really impressed with their equipment. Mm-hmm.
And then in terms of the analysis of the bird recordings, did you mostly rely on the AI embedded in the data software analysis equipment, or did you rely on your own ear to analyze the data, or maybe a combination of both with maybe some QA, QC of
Yeah, it was 100% my ear. So that's why I was embarrassed to tell you about the swallow issue, violet green tree swallows. So I swear I joke my superhero power is I can identify most every bird by sound. Almost, not really. Don't even go with the goals. Don't start with the goals. But, like, I'm from the East, so I can do it really well in the East. Out West, I'm pretty good, and I'm really good with songbirds. So something like that, I can do it all by myself. It's time intensive, and there are detectors now that can go through and do a really good job that are almost making people like me irrelevant when it comes to data analysis. But that's technology in life. Yeah, but so far it's just me. So 940 hours and 860 hours, that's 1,800 hours. To talk to the boss.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming tonight. This was a fantastic program, Jacob, and
Thank you.
we are so enjoyed and the sounds. Most of us are very attuned to sound and love the sounds of nature and escaping to those places where sounds are so precious. So
If I may, there's a podcast that I made with Colorado Public Radio called Terra Firma. Anybody listen to Terra Firma? You've heard it. So if you haven't, it's wonderful. They're 10 minutes long. They're my audio recordings paired with C. Marie Furman. She is faculty. I can't remember at what university, but she's an incredible poet and essayist. And she writes these beautiful essays or with the sound behind it, and they're spaced out, so it's not just talking the whole time. You get to listen, and anyways, it's a wonderful chance. And then Scientific American's National Park Nature Walks. If you want to go for a hike with me with a pair of headphones, we'll go all over the country listening to cool stuff, and it's like having me as your hiking buddy. So, and they're on my website. Go to my website and you can find them.
And then just locally, remember that we have the KGNU Nature Almanac with Steve Jones and Carol Cushman. That is so lovely to listen to as well. And you can find those on the KGNU website. Again, if you adore sound. So
Yeah. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
thank you.